didn't hook up with people that needed Zoom.
There we go.
I am here.
Yay!
Hey, Gail.
And there's much rejoicing.
I signed in with the wrong account.
We're also
I was telling them this is my very first Zoom meeting.
Oh boy. Yay. Well, thank you for being so patient. And thank you, Jacob, for texting me, because I was like kind of getting teary-eyed that nobody showed up to the lunch.
Oh no! Are we trying to tell you something?
Totally. I was sitting here praying, well, Lord, we're just casting our bread on the waters, and it is what
And
it
it's
is.
coming back soggy.
And look here, there's like 12 people. So whatever. So this is great. 8, 9. That's wonderful. Thank you. So this one is about why Journey? Why does Journey appeal to us? Why is Journey different than other churches we've been to? Is it a church? Is it not a church? What is the Journey shaped hole in us?
Well, I guess I'll jump in then if nobody's going to take that rhetorical question. For me, it's exactly what it says. It's an imperfect faith community, not necessarily just a church or just a fellowship, or it's kind of like everything, a community, which means that everyone accepts everyone else as they are, regardless, like we say in our opening, political affiliation, gender, sexual orientation, anything, which is, I think, the embodiment of just what God wanted in the world, or he wouldn't have created us to be unique as we are.
What about you, Laurel? You've been here a long time. You're muted.
I read lists, but not that good.
That I had done that. Oh gosh, it has been a long time. Susan's been just as long. Probably longer. Yeah, probably longer. I joined 6 months in, and it was January of 2005, I want to say. So for me, I think it was the community, the energy, especially originally, the wanting to make a difference. The creativity. And just, I think, the authenticness of the people involved. It was just, a lot of churches say we want to be real. They use that word real, R-E-A-L, quotation marks around it. And I think that Journey was really real. There were times that, people fought or had difference of opinion or what have you, but it was always just, there was always a lot of love.
The honesty of people at Journey, particularly the people who stand up in front of everybody else and talk every week, right? The honesty of our pastors and our staff and our leadership is definitely something that has always appealed to me. I actually like the idea of reclaiming the word church, rather than shying away from using the word church for Journey, because we're not like not like the churches that a lot of us have, the traditional churches a lot of us have been burned by. I like the idea of reclaiming the word church, because church doesn't have to be like those traditional churches a lot of us got burned by. So I say, call it a church.
Good for you, because I just shy away from that word, because I think it has preconceived notions, and I don't want people to think that I go to one of those places. So I usually call it a faith community, and or I call it a hippie church, or I call it, I put a label on it. So it's not, I just, there's so much, and Laurel said the right word. I mean, real. And there's so much hypocrisy. You go, do you listen to what it says and still do these things? I know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no.
I just came across some pictures and just artifacts from when we did a Walk to Emmaus in November 2005.
Mm-hmm.
Susan, were you part of that? I don't remember. Oh, now she's muted.
I was part of one that you nominated me for, and I don't really remember the year.
Oh, that's right. That was right. I was your sponsor. You were the next one.
Yeah, right.
And it was all about a loving community, the idea of the beloved community. And I think Journey really strove to get to that place of being a loving community, a beloved community.
I agree.
I see Susan on here. The other Susan Harris. Hi. Susan, what brought you to Journey, and why do you keep hanging around despite the fact that it was really hard,
Well, hello. I have to say I can't see anybody. I don't know why I've tried to get on twice, but
well, we can
so
see you
it's
and
black.
you look beautiful.
Well, thank you. If I need to adjust, let me know. So I came to Journey after having some difficulty at a different church, and I felt very accepted, and I got to try some really fun art ideas. And I think one of the things was the freedom of being able to just try things, and people being, okay, let's try it. And I think that's a huge miracle and a huge gift to the world to be able to say that. It is difficult for me to come because I work night shift and I just can't not sleep anymore. I used to be able to not sleep, but I can't not sleep anymore. And I was thinking about why stick around, and I think the stick around question is because I thought I'm moving towards Dripping Springs, I'm moving further away, but Journey is worth keeping. The vision of Journey to be something different, to be a place where anybody can come, where we can try new things, where we can try it differently, where we can really kind of critique the church as the church, is a really important characteristic to have. We have to be able to look at ourselves and look at our brothers and say, we're doing something right, or we're doing something wrong, or we need to adjust. And that's not very easy in a big church, or a church that's kind of encrusted in its own organization or its own ritual. And I like being able to look at to have some ritual to keep connected, but to not have so much that it keeps us from moving forward as a individual or as a community. So that's why I want to stick around, because it's worth having.
Yeah, I know.
That's beautiful, Susan.
I know, Natalie.
I'm sorry.
I said that's beautiful. Thank you for saying that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
I know Natalie is in transit, so she'll join us as soon as she can get home. I think she's probably listening in on her phone. Who have we not heard from? Stacy, are you on?
I am. I was drawn to Journey in a little bit different way, being on staff and all. But the answer would still be the same, I would think. Partly what you guys have already said is just being real and honest, and especially as a staff, you don't always get that on a church staff. Being honest with each other, being open with each other, or even just knowing things as a staff and then not being transparent about that with the community, had that in my past, and I needed to get away from that. And then partly as staff and partly as just a journeyer, I've always liked about Journey that we all don't have to believe the exact same things. It's a place where we can experiment with what we believe. I grew up with a very strict Baptist background, and everybody believed all the same thing. And if you didn't believe that, that was not okay. You weren't supposed to question that. You weren't supposed to doubt that. You're just supposed to take it. So Journey to me has always been a place where I can think outside the box a bit and decide what I do believe, and if I do still agree with those things I grew up with or not, and just new things as they come along.
Stacy, that was beautiful. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
I think just to piggyback on Stacy's is that one of the things about Journey is that questions are always welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is uplifting and enlightening, and something that I really appreciate, because I've always been a questioner. So it makes it nice in a church faith environment that you can say, well, why would we want to believe that? Why do we believe that? So, and okay, here's the precedent for it, kind of would be frequently the answer. And it doesn't mean you have to believe it, but this is the precedent for it. And I'm okay. So Gail, I am curious to hear from both you and Jacob, who have training in these kinds of things, what you like about it.
Jacob, you want to go first or second?
I'll go first. What drew me to Journey is that there was a need for me. Both me and my wife were like struggling through finding a church, and I was in seminary. So I was looking, and we were going to all these churches and nothing felt right. And it felt like we could walk into a church, not talk to anyone, leave, and we weren't needed. Like it didn't feel that we were engaged. And Journey, even online, just welcomed us in with open arms and said, we have a need for you and we want to celebrate you. And I still feel that there's still, like, we're asking, what was the Journey shaped hole in us? Well, it's also what is the us shaped hole in Journey. And I think that's what is awesome, is that there is space for all of us to come and be welcome. And another thing that drew me to Journey is that it's so different from anything I learned in seminary. It's not the big steeple churches where you wear the fancy robes and you say the fancy words and like perichoresis and all of these.
You say perichoresis?
I love that word, but
And then we define it.
Yeah, and you would define it, yeah. And it felt like it stripped away some of the rigidness of church that I had been taught in seminary, and it was just a free space. And it really was, meeting Rick and having him as a professor and him being like, we're tearing all the church down. We're going to completely throw all this away. And I was like, okay, I can do that. I'm ready. And I was right there with him. And yeah, I just think Journey continues to be different and welcoming. And as several people have said, it's really creative. And I think that's really a fun space to be in.
That's cool.
How about you, Gail?
For me, I had been in probably every traditional kind of church there is growing up, from the beginnings in the ultra-conservative Church of Christ and on through Baptist and Lutheran and Episcopal and Presbyterian and Catholic, and all of these churches and their various Bible camps or not, and all of them touched my life in larger or greater degrees. And I have always loved parts of all of them. It grieved me terribly. It grieved our whole family when we were when we were kicked out of the Church of Christ formally one Sunday, and when I was a child, and because of believing that the Spirit actually still moves and exists and works in people, you know. And that was a heresy to them. And as a result of that traumatic experience, our family continued to do the college ministry that we were already doing in the church. It just migrated to our living room. And that grew then over years, grew into an actual independent church that was formalized, called the Fellowship of the Way of Christ, that I participated in actually forming when I was in high school. And it was made primarily, it grew out of that college ministry, which was largely to Rice students and students who went to what was then called ACC, Abilene Christian, and Baylor, and, you know, the whole panoply of Christian colleges in Texas, and then from as far off as Harvard and other places. But it was always very highly educated, you know, people that I grew up with, that they came and lived in my home often. And I missed that in all the churches I tried. I mean, I went to Assemblies of God. Everything. And as an adult, and a lot of the time I was shunned because my husband at the time refused to come to church with me, flat. And as a single woman, a married woman coming to church singly is shunned. And in most mainline churches, certainly at that time, you know, we're talking 70s and early 80s, and I kept running into just flat, willful ignorance. And I knew my Bible bottom up, you know, and I knew when I was being fed a line and when it had spin on it. I knew better, and so I never could find a home, and so I was looking for. I had a journey-shaped place in my heart, because that particular family church, you know, the fellowship. The pastors were my parents, who had wounded me so deeply when I was divorced. And they reacted out of their Church of Christ roots, you know. And so I still deeply love the people of the fellowship, but it was no longer a church home for me, and hadn't been for many, many years. So when Rick and Vicki came to seminary and looking for an intern, and handed out a piece of paper that said what Journey was. And when Rick accidentally let go an expletive, you know, during the whole thing, and completely offended one of my classmates. and I was like, oh man, that is my tribe. I hadn't even been to Journey, and I went home and told Shelby, we're switching churches from the Methodist church that we were at. This week we are starting to go to Journey. And we went. We never went back to the Methodist church. I never left Journey after that. I pursued you all because I wanted to be the intern. You never had a chance to say no. And
you weren't really inclined to, just say no.
And I appreciate the level of education. I appreciate the questioning. I am not threatened by it. I enjoy it, you know. I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, when are they going to show their real side? You know, like Stacy was saying, at other churches, there was like the public version, and then there was the underbelly of the beast that was what was really going on, you know?
Yeah, and then you looked at our books and you knew we were being truthful.
There was a gay couple that came to Journey for a while, And this is way back at the warehouse. And they had been to a lot of different churches and had a, that kind of, I don't know, I guess maybe a more evangelical kind of church background than I have. My background is not at all evangelical. So they were really wanting that church home. But it's this, this same-sex couple, and they would try different churches that claimed to be affirming. And I remember after they'd been there a few weeks, one of them said to me, "So we're liking it here. We're waiting for when you guys are going to try to fix us."
Mm.
And I said, "Well, did you see the imperfect part in the name?"
Good for you.
We're not really in the business of fixing people. Don't think we need to fix people. I don't see anything about you I would fix. So, yeah, anyway. But that waiting for that shoe to drop, right, made me think of that story.
Yeah.
And the level of education and the teaching and the questioning, that is something that absolutely keeps me coming back. I love that.
Yes. I in fact, I miss the Sunday school part beforehand, because that did a lot more of that in-depth teaching, so, and I know Jacob's got designs on that. So that will be coming back, I'm sure. We just can't bite off everything at once.
No.
Baby steps.
Baby steps, slow. And I really love just the idea that we move along at the pace that we move along, and we're not on, our mission is who we are, not what we're doing. And I think that's so core. And it was utterly vital, as far as I was concerned, that Rick was humble.
Yeah.
So I haven't told my how I came to Journey story yet. You guys want to hear it?
Yeah.
I met Journey at a funeral.
Oh gosh.
It was summer of 2005, and there was a couple at Journey whose child was killed in a car accident.
Oh.
Yeah, and I didn't. They live out here in Pflugerville, and I knew them because their daughter, who had been killed, was in the Pflugerville Rec Center dance class with my oldest. And, just a couple of months previous, the dad and the little girl had been at grandma's house where we were hosting I think they were turning 7. Yeah, it was 2005. So both the girls were 7. And and Ryan had his birthday party. This is back when Ryan was Rachel. For anyone who's listening to this later, my oldest is transgender and came out at age 16. But at the time of the story, Ryan was still Rachel. So they just, dad and daughter had just been at our house not too long ago. And I would see mom and daughter every week at the dance class, and, and then we were at the local pool, and I ran into one of the moms who had a child in the same dance class at the rec center, who said, "Oh my goodness, did you hear about this family? This is what happened." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I was horrified." My heart really went out to the family. And, so this mutual acquaintance gave me information about the service. And so I show up. It was outdoors at our little, human created lake out here in Pflugerville. And there was this big marquee tent and this huge crowd. Oh my gosh. This huge crowd of people wearing yellow, because they didn't want black at this service for their child. They wanted people to wear yellow because their daughter liked yellow, because yellow was hopeful. And so people wore yellow. And I was there with my child because I thought Ryan could use the closure as well. I mean, he'd never had a friend die before, after all. And heaven knows I needed it too. So there we went. And looking back later, I was able to identify some of the journeyers that I met then, right? Because this couple went to Journey. And so Rick and David performed the service. So that was my first introduction. David read some entries that the mother had written in her journal, and he's weeping. We're all weeping. I mean, it was incredibly moving. The mother's brother sang a song, and then Rick got up and gave the eulogy. And I'm thinking to myself, what is there to say? How can anybody say anything at all coherent at a time like this, let alone comforting? And I was blown away by the power of what he said and the comfort that he was able to provide. And it was the first time in years, I mean, years and years and years, that I had heard from any person of any religious flavor or stripe that made me think, I want to hear from that person again. And I too had been looking around for churches. I had tried a lot of different places. I studied religion in college. I gave up because I couldn't find any place where I felt at home. I had grown so accustomed to living with that journey-shaped hole in me that I kind of forgot it was there even. And then I went to this funeral for this small child, and I afterward I talked to David, and I very, of course, again, burned by churches, right? But by God, I will be polite. I may not have any interest at all in organized religion and may, look slightly askance at people who choose to make that their profession, but I'm going to be polite, darn it. So I'm talking with David, and he asked something about, we're talking a little bit back and forth, right? And he was really friendly, and he was really welcoming, and of course. And he asked something about where I went to church or something along those lines. And I felt comfortable enough by that time in the conversation that I was willing to, while being polite, because I'm not going to say, well, I think organized religion is a bunch of hooey, and I really don't know what you're doing with your life. But so I'm not going to say that. But I decided I did feel comfortable enough with it to be a little bit open and say, well, my husband and I, our family doesn't actually attend a church right now. Our problem is not so much with faith, but with religion. And he just threw back his head in that way that David had, and he laughed. And he's like, we get that a lot. And so I followed up. I, sought them out and discovered that they had a super crappy website, and which we then later on replaced, Terry and I. And but I started going very shortly thereafter, and didn't look back again. It was a couple of weeks later that I knew for certain that I was going to stay, right? I mean, I was liking it, but I was still nervous because, again, burned, right? So waiting for that shoe to drop, waiting for something to go wrong, waiting for the ugly truths to be revealed. But it had been 2 or 3 weeks, and I read a lot, for those of you who don't know that about me, and fiction. And I was reading something, and Rick and David had mentioned in the service that the next worship series they were going to do was going to be about, I don't know, something. I think it was something along the lines of people being God's hands in the world. And so as I was reading this novel over the course of the week, I thought to myself, oh, this has a theme of people being God's hands in the world. So I took it with me to church the next Sunday, and I loaned it to Rick. And I thought to myself, wow, okay, so I'm going to go to this church and I'm going to loan a novel to the pastor. I'm going to go to this church and that I've just started going to, and I'm going to loan a fantasy novel.
I was going to say, it wasn't just a novel.
With a fantasy,
and it's this thing, guys.
With a fantasy religious system in the novel to the pastor. I'm going to go to this church where I've only been going for a few weeks, and I'm going to loan a fantasy novel with a fantasy religious system to the pastor of the church so that he can use it for research for future sermons. And he did.
Aww.
And I have never looked back.
Good book.
Like, those are my people. This is my place. This is where I belong. This is where I am accepted. So yeah, that's my
What was the novel, Margaret?
journey. I'm sorry?
What's the novel?
The Curse of Chalion.
The
by
Curse
Lois.
of, spell it.
I'll put it in the text, but it's called
Okay.
The Curse of Chalion, Chalion.
Okay.
And again, fantasy novel.
Thank you. Got it.
The author
Oh,
is named
neat.
Lois McMaster Bujold, Bujold. And if I could only read one author's work for the rest of my life, it would be her.
Yeah, I will read. I will read anything she writes.
Anything that woman writes.
I've
It is
enjoyed
all
her
good.
books as well.
Yeah.
So,
The second book in that same fantasy series called Paladin of Souls is the one that Rick particularly liked and actually used specifically. But he did. He referenced the books in the course of the sermons. It was awesome.
so Natalie, haven't heard from you.
Well, I'm so sorry to be late. I'll go back and watch this from the beginning because I hate that I missed. But I will say I've thought about this a lot. A lot of churches and people ultimately got sort of born anew when they left Riverbend. And I'm one. And so I was at Riverbend when it was like 240 people, and I did the first women's class, the Women at the Well class, and for 9 years, and then opened it to men for another couple of years. And I was deeply involved in women's ministry. And long story short, a young minister who was in our home group, told me when I was the only one left in our home group that had been formed by people who wanted to meet, that actually they wanted me out of the church, that was known. And so I had been told that year for the first time that I was not going to be allowed to have anything more to do with women's ministry because they wanted us to cut it from the weekend we had always had once a year to be ending on Saturday night, so that, because they said, the women are the ones who do all the classes and children's classes and all that. It's really affecting. And by then there were about 1,500 people in the church. And I said, the very fact that the women are the ones who do all the classes is the reason why once a year they should be able to have a full weekend. And they said, okay, this is the last year that you're going to be doing the women's retreats. And so I left, and I was really wounded, and I spent a year almost not going to church at all, but occasionally kind of searching, because I had liked Riverbend. It had been a real good place for me when I started there, when my daughter was 4 and my son was 1. And so what happened is that I learned that Clint and Pam Dunnigan, who are wonderful human beings and professors at college, and they're both ordained, and each of them had been divorced by their spouses. And so they were not allowed to preach from the Baptist background. And so I learned that they were coming to Tarrytown Baptist. And Tarrytown Baptist, I won't go into the details, but because of them welcoming gay people, the people who had been there for 50 years were leaving. The church was just having this huge switch and change around. And so bottom line is there were only, it holds about 200 people, and there were probably about 80 or something that were coming when I first got there. And Clint and Pam Dunnigan, as I got to know them, came to understand. I was so welcome to be part of women's ministry there, and I just loved it. And they eventually explained to me that there is something called commissioning that Baptist churches can do, and it's not ordaining. They said, if you're interested in being ordained, we would support you, because you are clearly a minister to women. But if you don't need the ordination, we can commission you. And what that means is the church says, we recognize that you have a calling and that you're doing it. And so we are commissioning you to be a minister. And they gave me a real work service where I got to have 15 minutes or whatever to tell my story of my calling and how I got there. And then they commissioned me, and I got to sit. This is what I thought of, Gail, when you said you wanted something where we would inaugurate you and Jacob. And, you know, I got to sit because I couldn't kneel. My knees are not that good at the front of the church after I had told my story, and have everyone from 11-year-old Casey to 85-year-old Esther, who sat by me in church every Sunday, come and lay hands on me and whisper to me just whatever their words of encouragement were. And at River Bend, I had never been allowed to be part of the laying on of hands. And that was always something I yearned for. I want to do that to everybody who feels called, ever. And so it was an amazing experience. And I got to do everything I wanted to do. When I started working with women in prison a couple of years later, Jim ended up being about $700 or $750 for the first year of the Truth Be Told class that I got to create at the prison. And then we went to, because it grew, we went to Terrytown, and they contributed. They were our first contributors. So I was very deeply moved and loyal to that church. And when I got to go to my first vigil at Journey, I fell in love with everything about it, just without even going to a worship service.
And that was because we were like next door neighbors or sharing space or something, right?
No, this was way before that. This was at the warehouse.
Oh.
They were at the warehouse, and they did amazing vigils.
Oh, yeah.
Amazing. And so I got to be part of, just by showing up and having somebody being, what did they call them? The sentinel?
Sentinels.
Yeah, sentinel for me. I got to spend 2 hours, because that's what I wanted, in solitude there, and have somebody, hold space for me. It was amazing. And then I don't remember who it was. It might have been Fran that told Rick about the Truth Be Told, and they invited me to come and tell about Truth Be Told. And Bethany was the one that met me and talked to me and prepared me, and I got to tell the Truth Be Told story. And immediately afterwards, Doug Sheehan, is that what his name was? He came to us and said, "How can I help?" And we had a brand new board. We had a board, but it was not very effective. And he said he did a board training. They provided space for our board meetings to happen every month. They provided a closet. We didn't have any offices, they provided a closet for us to keep our stuff in. And from that point on, and they became regular contributors. And so it was just like amazing. Here was Terrytown, this tiny little church, and here was, a Journey that was bigger, but still not wealthy, but both were, steadily contributing to the prison work. And so it was, I think, in 2010 or 11 when I realized by then Clint and Pam Denigan had left, and Reagan and Cynthia, they had left Reagan and Cynthia in the lurch, really, because they were invited for the four of them to work together in a really creative way. But immediately they moved here, and Clint got diagnosed with heart failure, and the doctor told him he had to quit ministry and go away. And so Reagan and Cynthia were left with this church, and I loved them, and I was a real part of women's ministry there. So when Journey started, Journey didn't do anything but love what we were doing. but nobody was there saying, come join our church. Journey doesn't do that. Leave your church and join our church. But I yearned for what I saw Journey had. And as the church began to kind of fall apart under Reagan and Cynthia, just over a period of a couple of years, I was real actively involved, but I did, pray and pray, God, if there's a way, show me. And so when they were at Beverly Hall, that's when they had already been at Beverly Hall most of the time that they were there. And I joined when I think there was still about 6 months there before we went on to a building.
What was it in Journey that was calling to you, Nathalie?
Everything that everybody has mentioned. It was the essence of everything that I got as a teenager when I went to camp. It was absolutely
without the mosquitoes.
Yes, it was full of spirit, and it was people who were not afraid of being honest about what life is really like, and not giving religious answers, but actually encouraging people to think for themselves and state their opinions and bring it all out in the open. And one more thing is that when I came to Journey and they said, how do you want to be involved? I said, I'm totally immersed in the prison work. And truth be told, I need to just show up on Sunday mornings. And I really don't feel like I can do anything else but that. And Rick said, absolutely, that is fine. And so I got to have, and I signed up pretty fast for the Mind team because I love relational Bible study, which was something I'd done with women at Hobby Prison, different from Truth Be Told. And so I got to have a relational Bible study group at my house, and Susan and John Corbin came, and a whole bunch of other, about 8 other people came pretty regularly. And we did that for, I guess, about a year. But anyway, it was the freedom to do what I feel called to do, and no pressure, but also no holding back. When I had something I wanted to be part of, I got to step in and say, I want to be part of that. I want to be on the soul team. I want to be a shepherd. So, when I was no longer exhausted with Truth Be Told, I got to, jump in with both feet.
Yeah, one of the things that Nathalie mentioned, that what you said reminded me of, is since it's Journey is a community driven place. Mm-hmm. So it's not top down. So if somebody comes up to a pastor or a staff member and says, I think Journey should do da da da, then the answer is always, great. How are you going to do that?
That's true. That's true.
I mean, we'll support you and we'll help you in it, but it's not like we're going to do it. You got it. It's yours. So.
Yeah, that's like what I experienced at the beginning, like with, they ended up calling it Fred groups, but the small group ministry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those were fun.
I'm wondering what has kept y'all here in this discernment period? Because I think we've talked about what drew us in, but I'm curious, what has kept you here since COVID and we went online, and then Rick leaving, and in this, up in the air kind of place? What has kept you here? And I know we don't have a lot of time, but
I'll start.
What did you say, Nathalie?
A huge amount of curiosity. It's like, what is God going to do next?
Yeah. For me, it's loyalty. I have not been part of Journey for the last 5 years, or 6 years now. I've come just every once in a while, kind of stopped in, but it's loyalty. And in the summer, last summer, I took a class like a book study. And it was so good to see people that were like family to me. And that's why I, pop on here and so forth.
Thank you, Laurel. So glad you do.
I'm glad you do too, Laurel. It's good to see you.
Thank you.
How about you, Susan?
I just feel like this is family. And it's just, how are we going to keep it together? And so I'm willing to see it through. And I'd like, because I believe in what we stood for the last 17 years. And I hate to see that die. And I'm not sure I can stomach many other churches either.
Susan Harris?
I think you missed my speaking earlier.
Oh, you said.
But did you have a question, Emily?
Yeah, what Jacob said. What makes you say it again, Jacob?
Yeah, what has kept you here in this Oasis discernment period and post-COVID, post-Rick, all of that?
I did answer earlier, but I guess to expand on it some is that I guess in my COVID time, I really feel like I've kind of I've been listening to some Richard Rohr, but I feel like I'm tired of the dualistic thoughts of left and right, up and down, conservative, liberal, and that we have to embody and be what we are, whatever God made us to be, whatever we are individually and whatever we are as a group. And that's kind of calling to me. And I've talked a little bit with Gail about really feeling like art is the thing that is calling to me, and that our expression of creativity and our expression of creativity is our expression of God in a sense, because that's God is the creative. So the creative in us is God. So whether it's art or Margaret's baking and her awesome cakes, whatever the thing is that makes us, it's Susan's writing and Gail's presence and all the different things that we have. Gail does a lot of incredible sewing and stuff, but also just presence. The presence of God in us is that creative, and I want that. And so I felt like, I think I told Gail earlier that I just want to have art in God. I don't want anything else. I'm not sure what that looks like, but I'm ready to start that journey for myself, whatever that might look like, and gathering people with me and say, what does it mean to be creative and to have God and not have all the, we have our doctrines. We've already talked about doctrines, gosh, for 1,500, 2,000 years. I mean, what more do we need? A little understanding, yes, a little education, but after that, it's presence. And I'm not sure what I just said, but that's kind of where my heart's
really
going.
Good. You'll have to go back and watch the video too. It was very.
Thank you. So for what all of that is that I want to, for myself, become more of and not be so stuck in. And I hope that for all of us, and whatever that looks like. But I think that we're kind of started on this journey, with some of the vision of Rick, and now we get to reimagine what that journey is. And I don't know what that will be, but I believe that it will be good, because I believe in the people that have made it this far.
Stacy, your perspective might be different. How does this post-Rick time, why stick with Journey?
A little bit of what everyone said. I think a lot of curiosity on what Journey could be, where this could go. A big dose of loyalty thrown in there. And like Susan Corbin said, like, where else are we going to go, really? Like, there's nowhere else like this. So I feel like we're kind of all stuck together at this point, and we got to figure out where we're going to go from here.
This is a lot, this story is the story of the disciples after Jesus left. And that's when things started happening.
Oh, don't let Rick hear you say that.
I was just thinking that.
Why?
'Cause, Rick is Jesus in this scenario.
Oh, no, that's not what I meant at all. I was focused on the disciples, Yeah, no. That's not what I meant at all. I meant just the humanity of the disciples looking around, and half the time they're scared for their lives, and half the time fire's falling out of the sky, and and Peter's getting up and preaching, and just all this weird stuff is happening, and it's exciting and it's scary, and things happened.
Yeah.
And they changed the world.
Yeah.
Well, thanks to a little Roman emperor, but besides that,
Yeah, well, I think he actually might have hurt us more than he helped us.
yeah, I think you're right on that too.
Well, change the world for good and ill.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Jacob, you're actually taking a big risk here in this post-COVID, post-Rick scenario. Where is your heart?
I kept telling Skylar when I was in my internship that I would never work at a church. I'll never work at a church unless it looks like Journey. And that was always my qualifier, was I couldn't do this unless it worked like Journey and felt like Journey. And I remember in my internship talking to Rick about you've been doing this a long time. Will you retire? What would that look like for Journey? And we sat at the Little Deli. That's what it's called. It's just down the street on Woodrow. And we sat there and ate, and he just told me about, I don't know how it would go forward, but I know it would. And that was long before he had said anything about retiring. And so I kind of got a hint, and I was in my head, I was like, oh, I wonder if they would ever hire a young guy out of seminary or, anything like that. But then he said he was retiring, and I heard about the 20-week discernment process. And I was like, well, I wish it fit my timeline better, because, I made my plans, and how God likes that. You make your plans and God says, haha. And so I have a residency lined up, and I was like, I'm not going to work in a church. I'm going to do a residency. I'm going to do chaplaincy. I enjoy that. It's hard. It's challenging. But then Journey called, and I kept going back to that idea of I didn't feel like it would work unless it was a church like Journey. And I think me and Gail have talked about how it's such a little pearl, just this little hidden pearl that's so beautiful and does amazing things, and just feels like, I keep thinking of the island of misfit toys.
Yeah.
That's where my brain goes, is that what other place would accept this group of weirdos and would celebrate us in the way that Journey does. And so that's what has kept me coming back. It's just that for some reason I'm drawn to Journey, and I don't think everyone is drawn to Journey. I think we collect a really specific type of person, and a type of person who's experienced types of things, and so it's just a wonderful place to get to explore. But yeah, there's some sense of loyalty too, like Stacy said, that I feel committed to this, and I've felt committed to it. As soon as I joined in, like you, Gail, I was ready. I dove in straight into the deep end and said, let's go. And so, yeah, and I still feel like I'm exploring that and discerning that, but I know that this is where I'm supposed to be right now. So,
Yeah.
Yay.
Joe, did you want to add something? But we're about to the end of our time, and I know that you've only known us post-Rick and post-COVID.
Exactly. I didn't realize how many Riverbenders were there, actually. I had been at Riverbend for many, many years in children's ministries, not actually dealing directly with children, but kind of helping with Connie Borcherding and materials and printed stuff. But what kept me coming back was during COVID, a little church that I'd helped with starting and everything was floundering. They were losing their pastor, and it's in Georgetown, and I was going, oh God, where am I going to go? And until my sister was acclimated to this area, I was going with her to Twin Lakes Fellowship here in Cedar Park. Knowing good and well that this is not a church that would ever accept me. But yet, knowing my background and everything, they were encouraging me to get very, very involved. And it's like, I can't be involved because if I am who I am, then you're going to throw me out anyway. So driving by after being at a record store down the street, I saw the flag out front and I just said, Andrew, quick, pull up their website. Let's see who they are. And that's all I wrote. I was there that next Sunday and checked the box last Sunday. So I don't have any plans on going anywhere anytime soon, unless it's straight up. You never know. But it's one of those things where, Nathalie, I understand. I immediately felt like, even though it was not said, this was a church or a community that was going to need me somewhere and was going to let me participate. And that's what I needed in anything, even if it meant swapping toilets. It's participation. And that's something, I don't know if you all know this, but I was ordained in the Assemblies of God back in the very early 80s. And of course, you can understand why I'm not with them anymore. But it has been one of those things where I was treated so horribly that I left my commitment to ministry for over 25 years. And I had my Noah moment, and
You mean
you're getting me.
Your Jonah moment?
Yeah, my Jonah moment. You're getting me shortly after I've been thrown up on the beach.
That's perfect.
So I took a shower and came to church.
Clearly the beach of the island of misfit toys.
There you
There you
Journey, that's different.
And talk about being misfit again, being Assembly of God back in the early 80s and not wanting to be closeted. It was very difficult. And I've seen religion and faith grow ever further apart. And I am one of those people that was forsaken by my religion, but not by my faith.
Bye, Susan. That
Bye,
seems
Susan
like
Harris.
a wonderful, wonderful place to stop. I think we heard from everybody. And I love you all. This was our last lunchbox, and I think it was the best. I love it. And for those of you who are on the Discernment Retreat Committee team meeting, which is coming immediately next, I'm going to end this meeting. I need to let my computer process for about 15 minutes to grab the recording of this meeting. And then I'll log back on to the discernment team link, which I sent you before.
Gail, just an FYI from somebody who's a Zoom person, you don't always necessarily have to do that. It will process on its own.
Yeah, I know.
I think it's important to give people a break. So.
Yeah, but I also have some computer limitations that require me to stop it and then pull it down. All right. Love you. See you in a minute.
Bye, guys.
Bye.